We know that getting into medical school in the United States is tough, but how does it compare to other countries? Let's talk about it. Dr. Jabal, MedSchoolInsiders.com. When discussing how competitive getting into medical school is in a particular country, it's not so simple as looking at acceptance rates. There are many other aspects of medical school admissions like GPA, test scores, prerequisites, and even the steps leading up to applying that need to be considered. Here's how the US compares to other countries. Make sure to stick around until the end when we'll rank each country from most to least competitive. To get an idea of how the US compares to other countries, we must first set our baseline. According to data from the AAMC, AACOM, and TMD SAS, only 36% of students that apply to US MD and DO schools matriculate, and only 25% of students that apply to Texas schools matriculate. With these statistics, it is not uncommon to hear of pre-meds applying multiple times only to be met with rejection. So what makes getting into medical school in the US so difficult? It starts with the structure of medical education. Unlike many other countries where you begin your medical training after high school, getting into medical school in the US requires you to complete a 4-year bachelor's degree first. This adds to the difficulty as there are now 2 points in the process where aspiring physicians are screened. Let's say you have 100 high school students interested in going into medicine. Out of those 100 students, maybe only 75 of them will get into college and become pre-meds. Now, out of those 75 students, maybe only 20 of them will complete all their prerequisites, take their MCAT, and apply to medical school. And out of those 20 students, maybe only 8 will get in. If you only look at the last part of this example, you might see a matriculation rate of 40%. After all, 20 students applied and 8 got in. However, this doesn't tell the full story. It doesn't account for all the students that were weeded out along the way. So when you look at the figure that only about 35 to 40% of pre-meds in the United States matriculate into MD schools, you also need to consider that there are many more pre-meds that dropped it altogether and never made it to the stage of applying to medical school. It should be noted that there are also combined 7 to 8 year BSMD programs in the US that grant both a bachelor's and an MD. However, they are often considered even more competitive than the traditional 4+4 model. Another factor to consider is that applicants are self-selecting. Medicine is known for being a long and intellectually demanding career path. As such, students that tend to pursue careers in medicine tend to be those at the top of their class already. So if you're one of 50 students fighting for a spot in a particular medical school, you're not just competing against 49 other average students. You're often competing against 49 other high-achieving students. Don't forget the classes that pre-meds take either. US medical schools generally require 1 year of biology with lab, 1 year of general chemistry with lab, 1 year of organic chemistry with lab, 1 year of physics with lab, and some math, generally some level of calculus and or statistics. Although there are subjects such as rocket surgery that are much more intellectually challenging, the amount of time and effort needed to get an A in these classes is often higher than in most other subjects. It's not enough to just make it through these classes either. You also have to excel in them. The average GPA for matriculants into allopathic MD programs is 3.74, osteopathic DO programs is 3.64, and Texas medical programs is 3.81. In addition, the average MCAT scores for matriculants are 512, 504, and 511 respectively. This means that to be reasonably competitive for US medical schools, you should aim for at least the 58th percentile for DO schools and between 80 to 84th percentile for US MD and Texas schools. Hard metrics aren't the only thing considered in medical school applications either. There are also various extracurriculars needed to make one a competitive applicant. More specifically, it's recommended to accrue around 150 to 200 hours of volunteer work, 50 to 75 hours of physician shadowing, 30 to 40 hours of patient exposure, around 200 hours of research experience, and multiple examples of leadership experience on top of attaining a high GPA and MCAT score. As such, finding the balance between extracurriculars and academics can be incredibly difficult for many pre-meds. With that as our baseline, let's see how difficult it is to get into medical school in other countries. The process of getting into medical school in Canada is very similar to the US. Although some programs do not require the completion of a 4-year degree, most pre-meds in Canada will complete their bachelor's degree before applying to medical school. The difference, however, is that medical school admissions rates are even lower than in the US, at around 20% nationally. The average GPA and MCAT score for Canadian medical school matriculants also tend to be higher on average than in the US. The average GPA for matriculants is between 3.7 and 3.95 depending on the school, and the average MCAT for students with at least one offer is 512.5, which is around the 85th percentile. One reason that medical school is so competitive in Canada comes down to the number of applicants per first-year medical school spot. In Canada, there are approximately 15,000 applicants competing for 3,000 medical medical school spots in any given year, compared to the US, which has 62,000 applicants competing for 23,000 spots. That comes out to approximately 5 applicants for each spot in Canada versus 2.7 applicants per spot in the US. Additionally, prerequisite coursework in Canada can vary widely between schools, so pre-meds need to pay more attention to the requirements for each program. The most common requirements are 2 semesters of biology, 2 semesters of chemistry, 2 semesters of physics, 1 semester of math, and 2 semesters of English. However, some schools require coursework in biochemistry, anatomy and physiology, psychology, and/or social sciences as well. Around 70% of medical schools in Canada also require applicants to take the CASPER exam as part of the admissions process. In comparison, only about 30% of medical schools in the US require CASPER. While this doesn't necessarily influence competitiveness, it is another hurdle to jump through. For a comprehensive list of which US medical schools require CASPER, check out our blog post, link in the description. Extracurriculars for Canadian medical schools are also similar to US medical schools, with research, volunteer work, leadership, and clinical experience being an important part of one's application. In the United Kingdom, getting to medical school is quite different from the United States and Canada. Although you can complete a 4-year bachelor's degree and then apply for a 4-year medical school program through the graduate pathway, this is not the norm. The standard pathway to becoming a doctor in the UK is to apply for a 5-year medical school program right after secondary school, the equivalent of high school. After that, you'll complete a 2-year foundation program with the National Health System, followed by either 3 years of general practitioner training or 5 to 8 years of more specialized training. So despite UK medical students starting their medical training earlier, the total amount of time from high school to practicing physician is similar to that of the US or Canada. Now let's talk about admissions data. In 2021, there were around 29,000 applicants competing for around 9,500 medical school spots. That gives us a matriculation rate of around 33%, which is less than that of the US, but greater than that of Canada. That being said, acceptance rates can vary widely between schools, with some schools reporting rates below 9% and others exceeding as high as 30%. One important caveat to note, however, is that UK students are limited to 4 medical schools on their application, so they are often much more particular with which schools they apply to. This is very different from the US, where it is generally recommended that pre-meds apply to as many schools as possible, often 20 or more, to maximize their chances of a medical school acceptance. In terms of the average GPA for matriculants, the UK follows a different grading scale than the US and Canada, which makes comparison difficult. In secondary school, when students are around age 16, they will take their General Certificate of Secondary Education courses. These are the basic qualifications in the UK and cover a broad range of topics like math, English, and science. Towards the end of secondary school, around ages 16 to 18, students choose their A-level courses, which are more focused. Students generally take at least 3 A-level courses. However, some will take an extra A-level to try to make themselves more competitive. Most medical schools have specific requirements for what A-levels a student must take, generally biology, chemistry, and one other science-related subject, as well as the grades that the students must achieve. Most programs require at least 3 A's, or 70% or above, in your A-levels to be considered for their medical school, with some requiring A-star grades, 80% or above, in 1 or more of your A-level classes. According to Statista, approximately 19% of students achieved A-star grades on their A-levels in 2021, and over a quarter received A grades. In terms of test scores, most medical schools in the UK require students to take the University Clinical Aptitude Test, or UCAT. The average UCAT score for low-tier schools is generally between 2,400 and 2,500, which is a 50th percentile score, and the average UCAT for higher-tier schools is generally above 2,700, which is an 80th percentile score. Now that we've gone through each country in detail, which one is the most competitive? Based on the data, Canada is the most competitive. The process and requirements of getting into medical school are very similar to the US. However, more students are competing for each medical school spot. This means that medical schools can be more selective with whom they choose to accept, which is evident in the slightly higher average GPA and MCAT score. Between the US and the UK, the US is substantially more competitive, not only because the average matriculant's MCAT percentile is substantially higher than the average matriculant's UCAT, but also the fact you first go to college and then apply to medical school in the US. The pre-med years are cutthroat and highly competitive, and the overwhelming overwhelming majority of pre-meds on the first day of college are no longer pre-med by the time they graduate. Whether it's organic chemistry, physics, or the MCAT, there are many tough hurdles to overcome during college that stop pre-meds from applying to medical school. The MCAT in particular has stopped many hopeful pre-meds in their tracks. However, it doesn't have to be this way. Doing well on the MCAT isn't a matter of how smart you are or how long you study. It comes down to spending your time wisely and studying effectively. The goal is to maximize information acquisition and minimize forgetting, and one of the best ways to accomplish this is by using high-quality, high-yield resources. The Med School Insiders MCAT course has everything you need to know for the MCAT in one place without needing to jump between resources. We prioritize the information you need to know for a top score and cut out the fluff so you don't have to. Unlike other resources, we don't just stop at content either. We cover the details that separate the top scorers from the rest, like study strategies, schedule, and even your self-talk and mindset. These are the tactics that propelled our team to 99.9th percentile scores. From the start of the course, we will walk you through a comprehensive plan and help you develop optimal MCAT performance from every angle. If your MCAT is coming up in the next year, learn more about our course at medschoolinsiders.com/MCAT or visit the link in the description below. With this early bird special, you get the course at a massive discount for a limited time, and any updates and upgrades in the future will be included free of charge. With that said, which country do you guys think is most competitive? Let me know with a comment down below. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out 5 reasons pre-meds fail to get into medical school or this other video. Much love, and I'll see you guys there.